Yes, it is possible to deadlift with your hips too low, causing you to lose a great deal of leverage and making the lift harder than it should be. You can see here in slow motion how I exaggerate the movement to show my coworker Nas how to deadlift incorrectly. One could argue that my hips went too high, and they did go too high, but they went too high because I started off with my hips too low. I'll explain further. One of the things that's very common when you start deadlifting is to try your best to use as much of your posterior chain, your hamstrings, and your glutes, and then your lower back is stabilizing the movement, not actually lifting the weight. And when you lift light weights, somewhere in the 70 percentiles of your 1 repetition max, maybe even 75%, you can get a great deal of leg drive from the quads and using your hips in the motion, but ruining the bar path because the bar is not sitting over your center of gravity. So the bar gets lifted off with the quads and hamstrings, but the bar has to shift to your center of gravity, causing you to tip forward a little bit. Here's a real great example here of me deadlifting 455 in slow motion, and you can see how I lift the bar driving with my legs and then I tip forward. This causes a great deal of loss of leverage and makes the lift extremely difficult. For a lot of people out there who are extremely fast, you can get away with this, but it's ultimately a flawed technique, or it is a, how you should say, maybe a high risk technique where you can miss your groove quite easily. I could actually kind of relate this technique to the bench press by Dan Green, sort of the push press, I guess the heave and push or the heave and shove bench press, where you kind of let the bar sink in heave is what it's called. But there are so many things that you can argue to make things work in your advantage. In competition, it's interesting because what you're doing is you're trying to get the most out of a single rep. And what you do in single reps might not always transfer into multiple reps. Actually, a lot of the time it doesn't seem to. One could call this inaccurate deadlifting, where you use the wrong muscles in the beginning of the lift. And you also cause the bar to be in the wrong position. Although this is a deadlift error, one of the great things I learned with pulling the deadlift with my hips too low is that I can sort of get a running start. I can get like a good acceleration to essentially yank the bar. A lot of people say don't yank the bar, but I found that I could actually get a lot of bar speed. But what will happen is that this technique will have trouble scaling up to higher weights. But what's interesting too is that deadlifting with my hips too low allowed me to kind of find that sweet spot. So I started off beforehand when I was deadlifting like in the low 400s. I would start deadlifting too high, and then I started deadlifting too low. And then what's interesting is that I finally learned how to get right in the middle. Here you can actually see for the Omar Isuf deadlift challenge from 2013, miss a 500-pound deadlift, and you can see how I start too low, and then what ends up happening is I lift the bar, I get a good kind of yank, and then you can see how my hips have to go up because the weight is just too heavy because of physics. And I'm going to freeze it right here so I can go a little bit into it further. So you can see how the bar gets past my knees, but I'm basically fully locked out. For me to complete the rep, I would have to use a great deal of lower back to complete the repetition. Glutes also would be needed, however, they are at a position of leverage lost. One of the key things I've learned deadlifting is how paramount timing is and acceleration is. With a weight heavy near your 1 rep max, you can't afford to get to your knees too fast. It's common to have a technique error, but as you've seen in the previous few reps, my position and timing is so flawed that my traps, lats, and lower back can do only so much until they can't, and my bar speed slows. Compare this to Johnny Candido's recent 500-pound rep challenge a few months ago. I think he did 7 or 8 reps. Link is in the description. His technique is flawless. Bar is close to his knees without touching, giving him almost perfect leverage at every single rep. So that ends this video. On my next video, I'm going to be talking about deadlifting with your hips too high. I want to be able to consolidate all this into a really solid playlist to help those that want to deadlift 500 pounds and get there as fast as possible with the best technique possible. And that way I can share my knowledge and experience as I have in the last 14 months. If you have a friend or know somebody that deadlifts with their hips too low, please send them this video, share my video. Thanks for watching.